Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. In the middle of the night, a Calgary mother woke to the sound of shattered glass.
This was a confirmed fire, so a fully involved house and potentially people trapped.
Some mom screaming for her kids.
Very surreal. I hadn't experienced anything like that before.
Within minutes, the entire home was engulfed in flames. Despite valiant efforts by firefighters, 2 children were killed in the blaze.
It got worse the more we found out about it.
It's hard to fathom how things would have gotten so carried away.
It will stay with me forever.
It was just a tragedy beyond belief.
Then I heard my son trying to take a breath, but he couldn't. Then he told me, "Mom," then he got.
Here now is Nancy Hixt with Incendiary Circumstances.
November 17th, 2004 started out like any other day for a Calgary family living in the quiet southeast community of Applewood Park. At about 9 p.m., the husband left for work as a security guard. His wife stayed home with their 2 young children. In the middle of the night, she awoke to the sound of shattered glass and the smell of smoke. Minutes later, at fire station number 12 in southeast Calgary, an alarm sounded.
We jump on the back. My position was called senior man or nozzle man. So in the front there's a driver and the captain sit in front, and then the nozzle man, which is sort of a more senior firefighter. Harley was the more senior nozzle man on the other truck. They were ahead of us, so we followed in.
West on Eve.
As they pulled into the neighborhood of Applewood Park, they saw a row of townhouses. One of them was fully engulfed. Firefighters could feel the scorching heat as they got off the truck.
That was a pretty ferocious fire when we got there. There was flames out the windows, out the doors. And as I stepped out the truck, she was right there screaming. That's a mom screaming for her kids. So there was no doubt that what we had in front of us was going to be difficult.
The mother had jumped out of a second-story window to escape the fire. Her 2 children, a 4-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy, remained inside the inferno.
I mean, we asked, where are they, right? And she wasn't able to provide that information. I mean, obviously she was pretty distraught. So it is your best guess. They're in a bedroom, right, at that time of day. So we had to get up those stairs, but you can't get up the stairs until you get some of that fire knocked down, right?
You know, once you know there's people inside, it's a very different call. So
she was grabbing at my feet, yelling, asking me or crying to help me get her children, and we couldn't go in because it was just too much black smoke.
She had told me, I asked her what happened, and all she had said was that she was sleeping and she woke up and there was fire.
We pushed a line into the main floor, got some of the fire knocked down, and then it just goes around and up the stairs. We went up the stairs and it was really hot, it was really hot. And you tried what you can, you're moving water everywhere. And I remember as we went up the stairs, the wall is there and I knew the bedroom was there. So I just took the nozzle and pushed the nozzle through the drywall to break through the drywall and then get some water up inside the bedrooms to help get that out.
we climb up the ladders, go in the windows, and we're in the back bedrooms of the kids' bedrooms. When we got in, it was all, it's not like on TV when you see firefighters going in a building and you see flames and no smoke. The smoke is down to about 18 inches off the floor, so you really can't see anything. When we walked in, we got in the window, and the ceiling had fallen down, and there was probably a foot of that loose insulation on the floor. So it was really hard to find anything because you're walking on drywall and insulation, and we understood the kids were there, but it was really, really hard to search for them.
They worked as quickly as they could, knowing the children were engulfed by smoke and flames.
You're just feeling around for stuff. You don't see anything. You're feeling for stuff, and we're taught to do a circular search. Either you go clockwise or counterclockwise, and your partner's always within voice communication, or you're holding onto a hose or a rope or something to stay in communication so you don't get disoriented and lost. And then when I got into the bathroom, I found something, and I didn't know what it was. There was no, the ceiling hadn't fallen down there, but I found something I didn't know what it was. It was about 3 feet long and very firm and hard, so I assumed it was one of the kids. So it was just very surreal. I hadn't experienced anything like that before.
He passed the tiny body to another firefighter who was coming up the stairs. It was confirmed to be the little girl.
It's pretty deflating, but you got to carry on. So you can't slow down. There's a nutshell somewhere. So you just have to carry on, do your job. The other crew was in the other bedroom, and I guess that was her bedroom. But the brother had gone from his bedroom to her bedroom to look for her, and that's where they found the brother there as well.
Despite the best efforts by first responders, the 2 children were gone.
It was kind of a quiet ride home, I remember that. And so we had kind of a small debriefing at the hall where we just talked about a few things, just amongst ourselves, and sort of people were telling their story from their side, and we were staying a little bit long past our shift time, and I can't remember. I think it was actually our rookie said, "If you don't mind, I'd rather just go home and see my kids." So it's kind of a poignant statement.
Welcome back. In the middle of the night, when a fire broke out in her home, a mother was forced to jump from a second-story window to escape the flames. Despite firefighters' best efforts to save her 2 children, they died in the fire. On the surface, it all seemed like a tragic accident, but investigators wondered, could there be more to it? Here again is Nancy Hixt with Incendiary Circumstances.
29-year-old mother of 2, Salma Burri, was rushed to hospital in critical condition. Her husband, Tassin Al-Meahi, arrived at the scene to see his home in flames. He was told his 5-year-old son, Ali, and 4-year-old daughter, Saja, were gone.
She's got serious injuries. She's at the Foothills Trauma Center. She did suffer injuries from the fall as well as smoke inhalation from the fire. He became extremely distraught and was in severe shock. He was sedated by paramedics, and we've treated and transported him to the Foothills Hospital.
A team of investigators went directly to the Foothills Hospital.
As the mother was en route, and we didn't know her condition at the time. She was intubated, so there's no way she could talk to us. They were breathing for her, or assisting her breathing. Our focus is figuring out cause and circumstance and what happened here, which takes a number of days to figure out.
Lauren said while there was nothing to suggest this was arson, there was a mandate to investigate all fatal fires.
It could have been accidental. And again, we go to the scene thinking the worst case scenario is we've got one chance at doing this right and don't miss anything. There's a lot of people around. It's a chaotic scene at that point. Lots of fire people around doing what they have to do to ensure safety. We couldn't go in the house right away because of that.
Investigators also went to Fire Hall number 12 to speak to those who battled the blaze, including Doug Churn and Harley Spate.
And what did they see? Where did they find the 2 children? For my investigation, I need to know where they were found, so we can get a better idea of what was happening in the fire.
It was a very hot fire. My gear when I came out was stiff. I couldn't use it anymore. Took my gear off and it would just stand up because it was stiff right from melting.
The firefighters recalled details of the deadly fire, information that was essential as investigators tried to piece together what happened.
Because that mom had no time at all, right? She had no time, and if there was a kitchen fire, it would have slowly developed. Smoke alarms probably would have went off if there were smoke alarms there, and they would have more time.
I remember talking with the firefighters, and as you said, it's devastation. They've 2 children. Many firefighters' careers are ended because of children involved in fire. The sad part of this is that they weren't found in their bedrooms. They were in bed. They would have gotten up scared from noises in the house and were trying to get to their mother.
Within hours of the fatal fire, a pathologist examined the bodies of the 2 children.
I went to the ME's office and witnessed the autopsies of the 2 children to determine were they alive, were they deceased. And that's really what we want to know. Were they living and breathing at the time of the fire?
The following day, on November 19, 2004, prayers for the children and their parents were held at a Southwest Calgary mosque. Ali Al-Meahi was just 2 weeks shy of his 6th birthday. His sister Saja was 4. Allahu Akbar. Nearly 1,000 people gathered to pay their respects and offer support for their parents, Tassin Al-Meahi and Salma Bari, an Iraqi couple who moved to Canada in the late 90s. As prayers were offered for Ali and Saja, Salma remained in serious condition in hospital. She was in a coma, still unaware that her children were gone.
We would ask that Allah makes it light on them, and that, the death of the children is easier on them. And we ask God that He makes it in their, they're rewarded for its extra. They tend to believe that, the children are going somewhere better. So that's a major relief.
Their tiny bodies were placed together in one casket and taken to a cemetery east of the city. They were buried together in their final resting place. Back at the scene of the fire, a makeshift memorial of children's toys grew. Inside the house, investigators said the fire started in the main floor living room, but the cause was still unknown. At that time, they said there was no indication the fire was suspicious.
As far as the fire investigation goes, fairly standard. We'll, do a complete scene examination before, we know what has happened, and hopefully that, coupled with the interviews that we do, we can come up with a cause.
It's our job as an investigator to go in and recreate what that person's house or room looked like, based on what we're seeing with the markers and things like that. We had electronic devices that would sniff things, and it would have gave us a location where we should take samples and send them off to the RCMP crime lab.
Lauren said, as they waited for results from forensic tests, they developed a hypothesis based on what they saw in the charred townhouse.
We learned that something happened in that house that was not accidental, so incendiary in nature. Somebody lit a fire.
Arson.
Arson.
Salma Bari was badly injured in the fire. She suffered severe smoke inhalation and broke both of her ankles when she leapt from the second-story window to escape the flames. She woke from a coma to learn her children were gone, and images of that fateful night came flooding back.
Then I heard my son trying to take a breath, but he couldn't. Then he told me, Mom, then he got. Everything reminded me by my kids here. You know, the stores, the playgrounds, the roads, everything.
Selma said it weighed on her that her family back in Iraq never got to meet her children.
Especially my mom, because she was loving my kids. She told me many times when she was on me, she told me, please bring your kids, I want to see them. Because I already 6 years, maybe I will die, I just want to see your kids. Because they were born here in Canada.
Ali's elementary school held a special ceremony in his honor, as the entire city rallied behind the heartbroken parents.
Muslim, Christian, Jewish, everybody, Sikh, Hindu. We got support from everybody in Calgary, almost everybody in Canada, actually.
Then, just 1 week after the fatal fire, Calgary police received 2 significant and unexpected tips.
So it was on November 25th that we were notified that these 2 individuals had showed up separately at different police locations, fearing for their life, and we ended up interviewing them on the 25th.
A man and a woman said they were living in a house known to police for drug and criminal activity in Northeast Calgary. The 2 individuals told investigators they had first-hand information about the fire and said it was no accident.
They indicated that they knew who had set the fire. They talked about how people had gone there and they said they were going to make a fire bomb and how they were going to teach somebody a lesson. And they were looking for pieces to make that fire bomb. They were looking for bottles. They were looking for lighter fluid. They were looking for something as a wick to make a Molotov cocktail. So although the stories were just a little bit different, there was enough similarity there that it certainly seemed believable, and we now had suspects for the fire.
The suspects were identified as Michael Sheets and Fernam Kazar, both known to police.
The witnesses also talked about, at some point after 1 o'clock in the morning, that both Sheets and Kazar left in a vehicle, and they came back a short time later saying that the deed had been done. And while they're sitting in this drug house, they can hear sirens responding. So they give you some perspective. This house was very close. One of the witnesses also says that for some reason the next day, the Sheets takes her out and takes her actually to the residence and points out. And as you can imagine, we have yellow tape around. There's continuity of the place, of the Applewood fire location. But Sheets takes her there and points it out and says that's the house that we had firebombed.
Was this seemingly tragic fire not only an arson, but a double homicide?
It certainly shed a light on this is likely an arson, likely some type of homicide, and so that's why we became involved. We don't know if the people that have come forward actually are somehow involved in this, and they're trying to cast suspicion elsewhere, and so there's still a lot of investigating to do, including starting to do surveillance to try to locate and do surveillance on the actual suspects, Sheets and Kazar.
Police said the new information from the 2 witnesses seemed implausible.
It seems almost unbelievable that seemingly on the outside, a married couple with 2 young children would have anything to do with a drug house or people that were trying to send a message. They had just immigrated to Canada, a few years earlier from Iraq. The dad was working as a security officer, and from all outward appearances, certainly when we took a quick look, it appeared like a normal family.
Could this be a case of mistaken identity?
On the surface, in the early parts of the investigation, it almost, if it was an arson fire and people were being targeted, It almost looked like it was a mistaken house, that whoever the offenders are, whoever they were, got the wrong house.
But the two witnesses were adamant it was no mistake, and their information changed the direction of the investigation.
It was pretty clear from the two witnesses that that particular home was in fact targeted, and it was to teach a lesson. So, as part of what we do is go back and check our own police records, check with other agencies, and find out a little bit more about the background of the mom and dad.
When you're looking at the victim family, there was nothing really in relation to the father or the mother in terms of a criminal history. The mom did have some recent files where she had been charged, and it was in relation to a dispute with another female. So reading into those files, it had kind of taken place over the year and a bit prior to the arson.
As we dive a little bit further into what took place, we realized that Salima believed that her husband was having an affair. That belief was something that bothered her, as you can imagine, and she really wanted to make sure that people in her community knew who this other woman was.
That other woman was Manar Hussein, a fellow member of the Calgary Iraqi community.
That led to a prolonged period of conflict between Salima and Manar, where there were hang-up phone calls, there were threats, and it led to the police being involved and, in fact, in one case, laying charges. There were complaints to police from both sides. Ultimately, some of them were not criminal, but at one point there was a death threat that was made to Manar, and during the investigation, Salima was found responsible for that.
Salma Bari voluntarily entered into a peace bond, admitting that she caused Hussein to reasonably fear for her safety.
Because of the ongoing conflict that had gone on between Salima and Manar and everything that was going on in the community at the time, they both wondered if she was somehow involved with this. But people have conflict all the time, and to escalate, to where there's a firebombing and an ultimate murder seems like quite a stretch, but it certainly was in the back of people's minds for sure.
As the investigation into the fatal fire continued, officers needed to consider if the alleged marital affair and subsequent dispute between the two women could somehow be connected to the arson. Police interviewed Tassin Al-Meahi and Salma Bari, who continued to mourn the loss of their children.
Investigators did start to talk to the survivors, and obviously they're under a tremendous amount of grief. They just lost their two children in a horrific way. Yeah, that's never easy, but it's important. It's important to find out who's responsible.
That's when officers learned about another incident at their Applewood townhouse, a little over 2 weeks before the fatal fire.
Some men had gone to the front door of her residence and had been asking for a fictitious, or somebody else, not her, but asked for another name. And she refused to open the door to let them in or to engage them. She talked to them through the door. And they seemed very persistent, and eventually she said she would call the police, and they left.
Police appealed to the public for information about that incident.
The homicide unit is now focused on identifying two persons of interest. Two male persons were seen at the El Mahi address at 59 Applewood Lane Southeast 10 days prior to the arson, and they may be the same people that left this address or were seen leaving this address on the day of the arson.
You've got this family, and you've got these two women that are having a dispute, but then we've got these statements coming from these two individuals. The names that she's giving, like, there's just no tie between the two groups. They're very, very different groups.
One of the techniques that we used was judicial authorization to intercept private communication, so in essence a wiretap. We relied on our major crime analysts to help us take a look at the data, and in looking at what cell towers were used by cell phones at the time, we were able to determine a close proximity to where cell phones were being used within the city of Calgary.
There's nothing that we've got in our databases linking the two of them. Then all of a sudden we look at the cell phone records, and now you're starting to see a connection between the two separate groups.
Police said there were calls between the two suspects, Michael Sheets and Fernam Kazar, and Manar Hussein's boyfriend, Abdulaziz El-Ahib.
We've got information coming from witness statements, CPS data sources. Sheets and El-Ahib had done time together, I think it was in Bowden. So we have all that information. We've got the witness statements, we've got the cell phone records, we've got the tower information.
There were lots of conversations at that time between Sheets and El-Ahib. Some of them were very, very quick, seemingly quick conversations, and some of them were a little bit longer. We could see that El-Ahib was actually, during some of the conversation, was very, very close to the Applewood residence.
But police needed to determine if this was all coincidence. Was there a connection to the fire?
It is confusing. And again, we don't have all the answers yet, so when we look back on it, we can kind of piece together the puzzle. But at the time, you know, we're still trying to figure out where does this fit in and how does this even work? All the while realizing that we have 2 dead children that we need to find out who's responsible.
In hopes of eliciting confessions, investigators used an undercover operation to target Michael Sheets and Fernam Kazar.
The undercover police officers were able to befriend both Sheets and Kazar. Sheets did admit to being involved in setting the fire. Now, keeping in mind these are undercover police officers, Sheets wants to impress them, so you know there were definitely details around it that he, whether it's bravado or whatnot, but he exaggerated how much he got paid for it, and there were other things like that you know we have to be careful about. Kazar was also a subject of an undercover operation, and although he made some admissions like he knew who did it and he was involved or he was there, it really wasn't, wouldn't be what we would call a confession for sure.
Police learned Sheets and Kazar were addicted to crack cocaine and turned to El-Ahib for money. In exchange, they were supposed to scare Salma Bari, who was having a conflict with El-Ahib's girlfriend, Manar Hussein.
You know, I think when we take a look at this case, you see this conflict that's been going on for over a year. You've got El-Ahib that for sure is orchestrating some things and giving direction to Sheets. Sheets is working with Kazar, but behind the scenes you've got Manar that's there, and I mean, she shows up and pays them the $120 that same night after. In fact, the firefighters are still there working on the fire, and she takes a cab to a location and meets with Sheets and pays him.
Just over 1 month after the fire that killed Ali and Saja Al-Meahi, police made a series of arrests over several days. First was Fernam Kazar, followed by the arrest of Michael Sheets.
There was immediate response from the public after the media release on Monday that this was now a homicide investigation. From that time forward, members of the public have contacted us and have allowed us to further our investigation to the point that we are at today.
Next, Abdulaziz El-Ahib was arrested. And then Manar Hussein was also arrested, who was alleged to have had an affair with Tassin Al-Meahi, Salma's husband and the father of their 2 children.
Investigators have determined that unlike the previous 2 persons charged, that's Kazar and Sheets, El-Ahib and Manar had an association with the El-Meahi family. And the investigation is ongoing.
Weeks after the loss of their children, Tassin Al-Meahi and Salma Bari traveled to Iraq to grieve with their family. They returned to Calgary 2 months later in February of 2005.
When I came to Calgary, the pain back again to me. It's very, very difficult. The apartment's very silent. There is not like before, no jumping on the sofas, no running, nothing. It's very silent. I saw my son in my dream 3 or 4 days ago. He was very happy. He just hugged me and he kissed me. He said, "Mommy, why your face look pale, not like before?" I just answered him. I said, "Because I cried a lot about you and your sister." Then he gone.
The parents found solace in knowing arrests had been made.
I want the law to punish them. I want them to stay in jail all their lives. That's what I want.
It's very emotional and very trying. I know from speaking with Salma, she wants to speak out. We've cautioned her against emotional outbursts, and it's very hard for her to retain and constrain herself. But we suggested to her that it was probably the best thing to do to try and control it and not give anybody any satisfaction of an emotional outburst.
Even defense counsel struggled with the devastating details of the case.
I think it's a hideous, horrific, emotional case, and it's difficult on them. It's complicated, it's involved, there's a lot of evidence. It's all sorts of evidence, circumstantial and direct evidence, statements. I understand there may be even wiretap.
Welcome back. When a fire destroyed a home, killing 2 young children, at first glance, it appeared to be a tragic accident. The investigation revealed the fire was deliberately set. What was it all over, and why was this family targeted? Here's Nancy Hixt with a conclusion of incendiary circumstances.
Tassine Al-Meahi and Salma Barri attended each court appearance in search of truth and justice for their 2 children. And then, 2 unexpected guilty pleas sped up the road to justice. In April of 2005, just 3 months after his arrest, Michael Sheets admitted his guilt, and not long after, Fernam Kazar did the same. They both pleaded guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter in the deaths of the children Ali and Saja Al-Meahi, as well as arson causing bodily harm for the injuries Salma suffered. Michael Sheets and Fernam Kazar admitted they were hired by Abdulaziz El Ahib to scare the lady, meaning Salma Barri, in exchange for money to buy drugs.
Mike didn't know this family. Mike didn't throw the Molotov cocktail, but he aided the person that did, and when he discovered the result, it was tragic for him. He's extremely remorseful. He had been told that there was nobody in the home.
Sheets and Kazar admitted they were the ones who knocked on Salma's door 2 weeks before the fire. They planned to punch her in the face, but she didn't answer her door, so they didn't get paid. Court heard they contacted El Ahib again on November 17, 2004, again wanting money for drugs.
Both Kazar and Sheets went to the residence on the way, obtaining some lighter fluid for the makeshift Molotov cocktail. And while parked nearby at the residence, the idea was then hatched that they would, to use Mr. Kazar's words, light the place up. They made a call to Mr. El Ahib, who was nearby. Mr. El Ahib at that point in time was told specifically of the plan to light the place up. Mr. El Ahib said, "Yeah, go ahead, nobody's home." Of course, that wasn't true. Salma was home along with her 2 children. Mr. Sheets threw a rock through the window. Mr. Kazar threw a constructed Molotov cocktail through the broken window. The residence was quickly engulfed in flames. Unfortunately, the 2 children were trapped and perished in the fire. Selma was forced to jump from a 2nd floor window to save herself and broke her ankle in the process.
The pair admitted they were paid a total of $120 for setting the fatal fire and used it to buy crack cocaine. Sheets was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Kazar was sentenced to 16.
When something like this happens and children are killed, when they have absolutely nothing to do with anything that could have happened in the background of this file, I think our reaction as members of the community is that nothing is high enough.
Sheets addressed the court and offered an apology to the family of the victims, although the parents of the 2 young children were not at the sentencing hearing. Sheets said words can't describe how he's feeling, that he's deeply sorry and he'll have to live with what he's done for the rest of his life.
I'm glad he apologized. It certainly doesn't take back what he did for $60 worth of crack.
Obviously, he realizes why he was in there, and it was because of his drug problem, and he's going to have lots of time to deal with that drug problem and hopefully get straightened out.
Incidentally, both Mr. Sheets and Mr. Kazar received an order that they be made to serve at least half of their time before being eligible for parole, which is an exceptional order, generally reserved for some of the more serious offenders and the most serious offenses. I guess the thing to stress is neither Mr. Sheets nor Mr. Kazar received any sort of consideration in return for their guilty pleas.
In the fall of 2005, Abdulaziz El Ahib and Manar Hussein stood trial. The prosecution's theory was that the arson was orchestrated by El Ahib and Hussein, following the fallout of an alleged affair with Salma's husband, Tassin Al-Meahi.
Each of them were charged with 2 counts of manslaughter and a single count of arson causing bodily harm being the broken ankle of Salma. Salma was angry with Ms. Hussein, made her feelings known within the Iraqi community, made it very well known the fact that Ms. Hussein had an affair with her husband within the Iraqi community, and that, as far as Ms. Hussein felt, was sullying her reputation. So there was bad blood with respect to the 2 women.
Both Kazar and Sheets testified.
Nothing was done in terms of any sort of quid pro quo. It was compelling, especially with respect to Mr. Kazar, because he, on his own, was the one who reached out to the police and provided a fulsome statement detailing everyone's involvement only after he'd already been sentenced.
Court heard damning evidence against El Ahib, who paid Kazar and Sheets. But El Ahib told a different version of events when he testified in his own defense.
I think that they intended to scare. That's what the intention was, to scare the occupant of the house that this was, he meant business. That's the essence of the defense, that there was no intention to have anything to do with the fire or to have anyone killed or really badly injured. But it went very badly.
The Crown said the case against Manar Hussein was more challenging.
And the difficulty the Crown had was an absence of evidence, if I could put it that way. We did not have any direct evidence showing that Ms. Hussein was aware of the plan to light Ms. Berra's house on fire prior to that happening. The Crown was inviting the judge to make that inference based on the fact that it was Ms. Hussein who made the payment immediately afterwards, and it was Ms. Hussein who had the primary motive here.
She also testified in her own defense.
Justice Hughes noted in particular in her decision that throughout her testimony and cross-examination there were tears. She cried throughout. And Justice Hughes found in particular, specifically, that those tears were staged. But in fairness to Justice Hughes, she was left with the absence of any evidence that Ms. Hussein knew ahead of time.
Manar Hussein was acquitted of all charges.
Certainly there was plenty of evidence to show that it was her who had the animus towards Ms. Berra, but there was no evidence to show that she was involved in any sort of intimidation campaign, and in particular there was certainly no evidence directly that she was involved in the plan to light the house up.
The judge declined to make any finding on whether the extramarital affair between Hussein and Al-Meahi occurred. Abdulaziz El-Ahib was convicted of all charges.
As the judge said, the relationships, what happened in the community and who was betraying who and who was having an affair with, it didn't matter. That didn't matter. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. I mean, that's context that came out. But really, at the end of the day, as she found, he orchestrated it.
El-Ahib was sentenced to 20 years in prison.
It wasn't the life sentence that the Crown was seeking. That said, a 20-year sentence is a heavy sentence. We think it does address the goals here of deterrence and denunciation.
The case took a toll on both the defense and prosecution.
It was really an emotional trial because the mother was at court and it was her kids that died, and she had to sit through the bulk of the evidence and hear it all over again. It was emotional because two children, two innocent kids, passed away in a fire.
I had a child that was of similar age to the two victims in this offense when the offense occurred. Anytime you have the death of a child, let alone two children, it adds to the stress level of the trial immeasurably. Yeah, this is a career trial. It will stay with me forever.
But no one was more impacted than Salma Bari and Tassin Al-Meahi, the parents of Ali and Saja.
I think about every moment I'm thinking about my kids, you know. They are my kids. I had only two kids and they passed away.
The couple divorced shortly before the trial, but shared frustration in Hussein's acquittal.
I'm shocked with the court. Where is the justice in Canada? Is that fair?
Men are walk freely and my children underground. She escaped from this court, yes, but she will never escape from God's court. I will wait for God to punish her. That's I will wait for.
Salma said her heart will never heal from the loss.
Everything reminds me. I feel them around me. I feel them, but the problem, I cannot touch them. I cannot hug them. I cannot kiss them. When I look at their picture, I said, oh, one day I was a mother. I had a mother feeling.
For the investigators who work to catch those responsible for the deaths of the two children, the case still weighs on them.
It's hard to fathom how things would have gone so carried away that you have death and the destruction that took place, and really for the whole community. And I think there's a lot of people, and probably still are a lot of people hurting.
Well, here's a couple of the articles that I had saved from that call.
And then there's the men who risked their own lives to fight the fire.
And you do get that little feeling in your stomach right away, right? Oh yeah, that's right. And then you just sit and think about it for a while.
It got worse the more we found out about it, so the memory got worse. So that was the tough part of the whole event.
It's frustrating when you see how people treat each other, right? But that is the nature of this job, right? It's the nature of emergency services, right?
They will always remember the two children and how hard they fought to save them.
Just finding that girl, and then finding out that how sensitive it was in the end. So, especially when I have three girls, so you just want to give your kids a hug, and be lucky it wasn't you.
The two men who made the Molotov cocktail and lit the house on fire have both completed their prison time. Michael Sheets finished serving his sentence in March 2020. Fernam Kazar's sentence expired a month later. Abdulaziz El-Ahib reached the end of his sentence in November of 2023. 19 years after the fatal fire, that killed Ali and Saja. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.